Namaste. The purpose of this exercise is to bring in a scientific bent of mind or scientific thinking in the minds of general public, and I hope I may be doing justice to some extent on these lines. Now, the topic that I am going to consider today is good life with diabetes. The term diabetes is a combination is derived from Greek and Latin. Diabetes mellitus, actually. We just call it as diabetes, but it is actually diabetes mellitus. Diabetes is a Greek word which means pass through, siphon out, and mellitus is honey like. Now, what is passing through and what is honey like is with reference to urine. When urine goes on, that means there is more passage of urine and it will be sweet, and such disease is called as diabetes. Now, before the treatment started for diabetes, let us look at the scenario how it was in the early 20th century. See, people used to feel thirsty, people used to feel hungry, they used to eat nicely, and all of a sudden they used to end up in hospitals, and the problems were kidney failure, eyesight loss, and ultimately death also, and sometimes amputations. All these problems were there, and nobody knew as to what was going wrong, and people were suffering all over the world. They were in hospitals and all that. Then came the breaking news. The breaking news was that some product which is coming out of the butcher's shop is going to solve the problem, and it was called as insulin. Insulin is derived from the term insula, meaning island, and insulin is produced by the beta cells of pancreas. So once this was found, that then the patent was granted to this team in Toronto University. Two main scientists were named in the Nobel Prize, but they decided to share the um, prize money with the other two scientists who are working with them, and they were so magnanimous that they declared the patent open to the entire world because of the problem that was there, and they were not greedy. On the same lines, actually, India today is talking about waiving of the intellectual property right with regard to COVID vaccine. Let us hope that we succeed in that, so that ultimately it is human life which is important. So now this is insulin is secreted in pancreas in beta cells. Now I told you the symptoms. Now these symptoms are so innocuous. Okay, it is called as a silent killer. Actually, a person living on the same street where I lived in Tumkur, he became blind overnight. And one principal was a foreign returned person of a college. He became blind. This was in late 1980s, and the first case was in late 1960s. So that was the severity of this problem. Now, why does it happen like this? Why is it that you are not able to notice that you are having diabetes? What happens is, because of the increased glucose concentration in urine as well as in blood, there is increased osmolarity. That means the blood becomes concentrated, and it leads to all these problems. For our system to be functioning properly, what is required is blood circulation should be uh, proper, normal to all the parts of our body. And because of this osmolarity or concentration of blood, it creates problems on the blood vessels. So there are various problems that are there. The first thing is, it is about the eyes. The fine blood vessels which are there, they get affected. So you may lose eyesight. Then there is what is called as peripheral neuropathy. That means the extremities, because of the collapse of the blood vessels, there won't be proper blood supply. So that can result in amputations. And because glucose is there, wound healing doesn't happen, because you are supplying food to the microorganisms. So diabetic retinopathy is there. Then kidney, on the same lines as it happens to the eyes, the blood supply to the renal system also is affected, and it can result in kidney failure. Towards the end, before that end stage renal disease happens, you start secreting proteins because of the breakdown of lipids. Okay, so these are the various problems that are there, and it can lead to amputations also. So this is a silent killer. So how do we solve this problem? We can solve this problem if we can ensure that there is insulin in our system. So directly start giving insulin. That is possible. And insulin, it is difficult, you cannot give it through the oral route, you have to give it as an injection. And today insulin injections are there. Okay, insulin no more is isolated now from the animals, that is bovine insulin. Okay, which they used to have different plants, and on large scale extractions used to happen and all that. That is not required today. You can actually synthesize insulin using genetic engineering. And insulin actually is a protein hormone, and you can, protein hormone means protein is obtained from the coming together of different amino acids. Amino acid means any compound which will have the amino group as well as COH group, and it is arranged in a particular manner. The structure of insulin has been proven, and you can use different methods wherein you can bring in changes in the structure of insulin and get the desired results. That is, if you are having type 1 diabetes. Actually there are two types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is one where there is no insulin secretion at all. That means all the beta cells have collapsed, they don't function at all, they are destroyed. Only then you have to go in for insulin injection, and you can definitely lead a good life if you properly monitor the blood glucose levels and the amount of insulin that you inject. And over a period of time you get that expertise, you yourself can monitor, because you will learn how to know the symptoms, because the symptoms that are there, you will be able to monitor the blood glucose level. But one should be very careful, you should have one or two chocolates or some sugar in patients, and complications that are there with regard to this. So now we have learned what are the problems that happen. So because of osmolarity, there is thirst, glucose, excess glucose increases that. Because of osmolarity, because the blood becomes concentrated, you feel thirsty and you drink a lot of water. And because there is glucose in your blood, it also induces diuresis, lot of urine passage is there. And because glucose which is there is not absorbed and utilized for the energy that is required for the calories to be produced, to be used, that is the source of energy for the entire body, you feel hungry. So all these problems put together, outwardly nobody knows that somebody is suffering from diabetes. The person who goes through this should be careful and get diagnosed and start treatment of diabetes. Now I have said that the title of this presentation is A Good Life with Diabetes. I am an example. Say almost for 20 years I am living with diabetes, and my diabetes is not type 1, it is type 2. That means there is my beta cells are still functional, and it is possible that they are producing insulin. So let us see how this particular thing is treated. If somebody is having type 1 diabetes without production of insulin, one has to go for the insulin injection. Different types of insulins are there. There are major three types: short acting, intermediate acting, and long acting insulin is there. You can take an injection, you can put it in your pocket and use it. And actually it has to be refrigerated also. Now different types are available based on your condition. You can go in, your doctor will tell you which type of injection you have to take. Now coming to type 2 diabetes, which majority of the people have, and it is not genetic, whereas the type 1 it seems is genetic. That means it runs in the families, whereas type 2 they say it is a lifestyle disease and all that. Okay, now if this is there, how to tackle this? So what are the points that we have to consider is, we have to see to it that insulin is made available. So insulin is secreted in the beta cells of pancreas. So find out how it can be done. So there is one particular class of drugs. This is called as sulfonylureas, and the compounds are glipizide and climepiride. What they do is they stimulate the beta cells to increase to secrete insulin, and they have very less action on the sensitivity, that means resistance which is there. So there are two things that are there. Okay, one is non-production of insulin, another thing is resistance to insulin. That means even if insulin is there, the sites that are there, the receptors that are there, they will be resistant, they will not be sensitive. So now we are talking about first class of drugs, sulfonylureas. What they do is they uh, see that insulin is produced by the beta cells. That means they stimulate the synthesis and have very less effect on the sites or receptors where there is insulin resistance. And I named the two compounds that are there. And next class of compounds also comes into the same categories, and these are called as meglitinides. Meglitinides, the compounds that are just two examples I am giving: repaglinide and natiglimide. Repaglinide and natiglinide, NID. These are the drugs which are similar to sulfonylureas. Their mechanism of action is different. They also stimulate the production or release of insulin, but the mechanism of action is totally different. That means the receptor site at which they act is totally different, and these also can be used. Next, third class of compounds are there. These are called as biguanides. In that, the compound that is used is metformin. Now, the mechanism of action of this is totally different. What happens is there is glucose production that happens in our system. Hepatic production of glucose is stopped, is inhibited by this particular class of compounds, which are called as biguanides. And as usual, they have some effect, negligible effect on the sensitivity of the insulin resistance is improved on hepatic cells and in the peripheral cells. I hope I have made it clear. Next, there is another class of compounds, that means fourth class of compounds. First two class of compounds, they are used to stimulate the production of insulin. Then this biguanides is the third particular type of compound which stops the production of glucose, stops the production of glucose. Hepatic glucose which is produced is stopped. That is one thing. Then is the fourth class of compounds called as thiazolidinones. Here the compounds are troglitazone, rosiglitazone. These are the two examples. I am giving these examples because the feedback that I got after my first presentation. So in case somebody is taking, they will know what is happening to them. That is why I am giving these names. Now here the mechanism of action is different. These enhance the insulin sensitivity in the muscles and in the adipose tissue. That means even though insulin is there in our system, there is resistance. That resistance is reduced. Okay, they enhance the insulin sensitivity in the muscles and in adipose tissues. They don't have any effect on insulin production. That means this particular class of compounds, they do not cause hypoglycemia. Whereas the other two classes of compounds which act on which stimulate in the production of insulin, they can cause hypoglycemia. That means if there is an overdose, or if you have not taken sufficient food, and if there is more insulin, the glucose level can come down. That is why they say you should also have a chocolate and all that. So there is a lot of compliance that is required from the patient who suffers from, who has this particular problem. Next, there is last class of compound. What happens is, this has got nothing to do with insulin. Just like this biguanides. What biguanides do is they prevent the generation or secretion or production. You can't call it secretion, production of glucose. Hepatic production of glucose is stopped. Similarly, glucose is produced in our intestines also, and it is mediated through alpha glucosidase enzyme. There is an enzyme in our intestines which breaks down the carbohydrates like dextrin, starch, sucrose to glucose. And if there is glucose in the stomach, this will not do anything. So if you can inhibit this enzyme, that means this alpha glucosidase enzyme, if it is inhibited, that also helps in reducing the blood sugar level and this particular class of compounds only will help in reducing the postprandial sugar level. That means the sugar level that is there after you have taken food. And the compounds that are used are acarbose and miglitol. These are the two compounds that are there. So overall, what happens is you can take any of these drugs under medical supervision. You have to consult a doctor. Either you can take sulfonylureas or meglitinides, where which ensures insulin production, insulin release, or you can take bigonides like metformin, which stops the hepatic glucose production, or you can take thiazolidinones, which increase the sensitivity of the receptors for insulin. That means the resistance that is there is reduced. Or you can use this alpha glucosidase inhibitors like acarbose or miglitol. So overall, now we have a clear picture. The purpose of this presentation is that if you are taking this, or in general, if you want to know how science has helped in tackling this problem, and we all are able to lead a good life if this happens. And the serious conditions, I have already told you what happens if the entire blood vessels collapse. That can happen in type 2, that can lead to death. And ketoacidosis happens in type 1 diabetes, where when there is no insulin at all, what happens is the breakdown of fatty acids takes place, and it causes what is called as ketoacidosis. That means ketone bodies will be there in your blood and in your urine, and that is a serious medical condition. So in other words, what we can do is, if we can lead a disciplined life, if we do not lead a sedentary life, if we do normal on a regular basis, if we do exercises and control our diet, it is possible to lead a good life. I hope I have succeeded in conveying this information effectively to all the people. So things to remember is, it is insulin which is required. If insulin is not there, then go for injection. If insulin is there, if we are majority of the people, they come under type 2 diabetes only. And how to tackle that is what I have told you. Thank you very much.